The Biden administration is conducting a government-wide review of suspected incidents of so-called Havana Syndrome. The mysterious, debilitating illness is named for the location where the first cases were identified in Cuba. It has sickened dozens of U.S. personnel around the world since at least 2016. CBS News has learned at least a dozen CIA officers returned home just this year after suffering similar symptoms. CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins me now for more. Hi, Olivia. Great to see you. So what do we know about these latest suspected cases, and how do they fit into the history of reported incidents?
Well, Tanya, what multiple sources have told CBS News is that in just these first few months of 2021, an alarming number of CIA officers serving overseas, more than a dozen of them, have reported symptoms consistent with Havana Syndrome, this mysterious illness that manifests with a variety of neurological symptoms, and as you mentioned, has affected dozens upon dozens of U.S. personnel in the past 5 years. What we're told about these cases is that many of these officers felt so sick so suddenly that they had to be medevaced from where they were. These cases spanned at least 3 continents, and at least one incident occurred as recently as March of this year. So it's obviously very concerning that these suspected cases are still cropping up. And while the government has not identified a cause yet for why U.S. officials are falling ill, whatever the cause isn't going away, and in fact appears to be increasing in these recent months.
So, Olivia, do we know anything about who or what is suspected of being behind these attacks?
Tanya, there are several working hypotheses depending on whom you ask. The most definitive answer we've gotten on this came from the National Academies of Sciences, which last year took an in-depth look and put out a report that said the most plausible cause of these symptoms was directed pulsed radio frequency energy, which sounds pretty serious. Some individuals who have been sickened by this syndrome say, though, that there's no doubt in their mind that it's a foreign adversary, most commonly Russia. Some have mentioned China, that is deploying a directed energy weapon, and that these are, in fact, hostile attacks on U.S. officers. When it comes to the U.S. government, there isn't that kind of consensus yet. The sources I've spoken to within the intelligence community say analysts are still examining whether all of these incidents, including 2 potential instances on U.S. soil, are really linked. Whether they're really the result of an attack by a weapon rather than being psychosomatic in some cases. And more broadly, what would be motivating somebody like the Russians to conduct these kinds of attacks? Why this range of people? Why these places? Why a technology that is now somewhat more traceable? And so even though the government hasn't come to a conclusion on whether these are in fact attacks by an adversary or something else entirely, many agencies are now vowing to get to the bottom of whoever is doing it and holding them accountable.
And so what is the U.S. government doing in response to these attacks?
Well, with this proliferation of new cases, Tanya, it does look like the government and the Biden administration are articulating something like a new level of concern. There have been already investigations launched within the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon, all of which have had their own personnel affected by these health incidents. The CIA established its own task force specifically charged with looking at these suspected cases and making sure officers who are feeling ill get medical evaluations and care that they need. The White House also told us in response to this reporting that the National Security Council is now coordinating a whole of government response and has launched a new intelligence review to examine whether there are any unreported cases that might establish more of a pattern to determine what these incidents are really about. Congress is also more increasingly involved, saying they've been holding fact-finding hearings behind closed doors and are going to do more of those. All of these things are very welcome developments for those who have felt sick for years, and they're no doubt going to want some more definitive answers about what's happening and what can prevent these kinds of incidents from happening very soon.
Right, yeah, because a lot of these CIA agents are still suffering the symptoms, is that right?
Absolutely, yes. And some of them have had some issues obtaining proper medical care. It looks like there is progress on that front. The CIA director, Bill Burns, said that it is his top priority to make sure that the men and women of the CIA get the care that they need.
Great. Olivia Gazis, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Tanya.